So I've been listening to the radio for, let's say, a quarter century. I always had the radio on in my house. I didn't have TV during 9/11, so I got all my info through the radio. And I became a fan of Eddie and Jobo, Mancow's Morning Madhouse, Jonathan Brandmeier, Opie and Anthony, Howard Stern, Don Imus, the T-Man Show out of Seattle when I heard them in San Francisco, JV and Elvis, all these shows. And all the shows had that moment where there was a radio war, where there was a moment that everybody was hanging out, having a good time, and then there was a show that they would either talk smack about or the show would talk smack about them, and they would get into a war. I was a part of the Mike Calta versus Bubba the Love Sponge war. That war, you never knew what was going to happen. You had all of Bubba's interns taking pictures of the promotions team in 2015. Like my first day working at the Bone, I had to go to the bathroom, and I left the tent unattended. And Tuttle from the Bubba the Love Sponge show took a picture of the tent and said, "Oh, looks like nobody cares about the promotions team over at Cox Media." And guess who got in trouble with that war? That radio war. Me. And now Tuttle's all, sober and doing well. But for a minute there, I couldn't stand Tuttle. But that was a very good trolling job. You know why that was a good trolling job? Because Bubba the Love Sponge had to earn his spot in radio. Mike Calta had to earn his spot in radio. The other show I worked for, Rover's Morning Glory, they had to earn their spot in radio. I've had to go through job interview after job interview for jobs. And yeah, you could say radio's dying, but you had to be selected to join, the squad. And we have this going on.
It's time for Hoppys Inbox, only on Hoppe Hour with Ryan Hoppe.
So, about 3 weeks ago, I interviewed Chad Zumock, the very polarizing Chad Zumock. Some may know Chad from the very lame Alan Cox show out of Cleveland, that punk-ass bitch known as Alan Cox. He's so awful at radio, he makes Rover's Morning Glory look like a Marconi Award-winning show. I'm not complaining about that little bitch. Some people may know Chad Zumock from all the wars he gets into with this nonsense known as the Dabbleverse. And I interviewed him 3 weeks ago, and we covered all of the maniacs in the Dabbleverse. And I thought it might ruffle some feathers, but I didn't know it was going to ruffle the feather of the so-called elite show. All right, enough of that music. Of the elite show in the Dabbleverse. So me and Chad, we talked about this show that pretty much rides off the clout of everybody else. There's a show called Who Are These Podcasts? With this guy named Carl Hamburger, I believe is what he calls himself. And he's this IT nerd who's in Rochester, New York, which is the saddest part about it, because I went to the ROC in 2015 for Rover's Morning Glory's Holiday Hangover with Alien Ant Farm at this very haunted theater. And I got very drunk. And you know that city's kind of a dump when it's called the garbage plate. That's their meal. It's like a casserole, and it's called the garbage plate. Like Chicago's got deep dish pizza, Florida's got sex trafficking, and hey, Rochester, New York, they got the garbage plate. But there is this podcaster that me and Chad talked bad about. And I got a lot of comments. People were like, "Oh, you're so jealous that Carl's got a bigger audience than you." And to me, whenever somebody has to flex about their audience being bigger, that's like saying, "My car's nicer than your 2015 Honda Accord, bitch. I drive a Cybertruck," or whatever. So every day, I Google myself to see what's out there. And I saw this, and I felt very accomplished. I felt alive. So when I interviewed Chad Zumock and I talked about that, who are these podcasts with that guy named Carl, where all they do is talk about other podcasts. So pretty much I found them because I would look up some of my favorite radio shows, Manco's Morning Madhouse, The Rizzuto Show in St. Louis. And about 5 years ago, this podcast called Who Are These Podcasts would show up on Apple Podcasts. It was brilliant. They would make fun of other podcasts. And like the first 2 years, they had awful microphones and they sounded like trash. And you could totally tell they had no experience in radio and they're just nerds that listened to Opie and Anthony and that knew about the Jocktober segment and wanted to be cool. And I'll give it to Carl. He ended up being friends with Anthony Cumia. He had him on the show. He's a part of that whole online anonymous troll bandwagon of making fun of Opie. And it's utter nonsense. And I know you're listening to me, Carl, right now, because you got nothing else to do. Your whole career is based off of talking about others. And that only works for so long. I mean, look at what happened to Bubba the Love Sponge. That dude was on top of the white trash radio world. And now he's paying to be on the radio. Yeah, he's got some money left over and he's making money online. But all the shows that pat themselves on the back and that are douchebags to everybody always end up floundering over time. And I saw this little poster you guys made where you made a video where you talked about me. And I guess you talked about me on your show on Sunday because I got a lot of friend requests. So first of all, I talked about everybody in the Dabbleverse when I interviewed Chad Zumock because I was looking for publicity. Yeah, I have listeners from when I worked with Rover's Morning Glory. Yeah, I got a lot of listeners in Tampa and people in Chicago that I went to high school with. And unfortunately, I just made fun of Rochester, New York. But because Rover's on there and I was on the radio there, I got listeners there too. It was all jokes. But I'm saying I got listeners everywhere. But now I got the anonymous trolls coming after me. And why are they coming after me? Because of this riveting headline from the ultra creative Carl, who totally didn't make a career off of making fun of others because you were probably brutally made fun of growing up. So it gives you a little power trip for the small penis that you have. Mm-hmm. It says here, I love this. First of all, it says, bitter ex-radio loser Ryan Hoppe, which that caption by itself is the stupidest caption I've ever seen. Would I say I'm bitter? I'm a little grumpy at the world. I lost my dad 10 years ago, found him dead in his room. Oh, that was great. A little traumatizing there. Both my cats died in front of me. I'm not doing the pity card thing. And then my other dad, my uncle, died 5 months ago. And we had an argument the last time we talked on the phone. So I'm not the happiest person, but I'm not bitter about my career. But this is what I love about this. It shows some guy named Pat Oates who looks like a boomer that barely knows how to use Zoom. And it shows Carl laughing into the microphone. And you know, their lowly paid producer known as Producer Chris, because they got to go with the radio vibe of having the name of the producer being Producer Chris. Even though there's already a Producer Chris in San Diego. But a radio show or a podcast that copies radio shows doing the tactics from the 90s, I'm not surprised. Carl Hamburger. It says bitter ex-radio loser Ryan Hoppe, which that is the stupidest caption I've ever seen. When you say ex-radio loser, you're saying, he used to be a loser in radio, and now he's not. I know you're trying to say that I'm not in radio, even though I'm employed at Beasley Media Group, and then I was working at Salem Media Group, and then I worked at Beasley, iHeart, and Cox. I've worked in radio for 12 years. I'm currently employed, and I'm not going to go down a lot of times whenever I've heard radio wars and podcasting wars, you'll hear guys like Rover go, yes, I make tons of money. Or Mike Calta, oh yeah, I'm the king of Tampa Bay radio. He doesn't really say that, but he's got that attitude. I'm not going to go down my accomplishments, but I will tell you that that's the stupidest caption I've ever heard, but I wouldn't expect anything less from a bunch of copycats. When you're saying ex-radio loser, you're saying, back in the day when he worked for Rover or he worked for Calta, he was a loser, but now he's not. And now he's got a great radio show, and we love listening to it because we talked about it on his podcast. Guys, this is the only time I'm going to talk about you because I got about 20 windows open of prep that I need to get to. But I just want to say, yeah, you guys are making probably decent money off of talking about others. But that's only going to go as far as it can. Because at some time, all the anonymous trolls that are your listeners, because I was getting comments from like XYZ123 usernames, not real profiles. You never get a mean comment from somebody with a legitimate profile. It's always a loser. All of them are going to turn on you at some point. Same thing happened to Opie and Anthony. And if you guys are trying so hard to be like Opie and Anthony, at some point, everybody that's ever listened to your show will hate you, and you will hate anybody that's ever worked on your show or listened to your show. And that's because you don't have a creative bone in your body. Again, that should be in my next billboard. X radio loser. And the last part, in this picture, you use as like the thumbnail for the video. It says bitter X radio loser Ryan Hoppe. You use the picture of when I won Best Local Podcast a few years ago in Tampa Bay. So obviously I'm not a loser. It was just a slow news day for you. You got tired of talking about Stuttering John and Shuley and all the nerds, and you're like, oh, this is a new toy syndrome. Because I've been down this road, bro. I've dealt with the Rovers Morning Glory listeners attacking you all the time. I've dealt with being recognized in public all the time for working at the Bone. I've gone to bat. I've gone to battle with Bubba the Love Sponge. And I'm telling you, they all were legitimate people that had to earn their jobs. And I got one comment, a guy's like, oh, you're probably jealous that you're working hard and he's just famous or whatever. That's not the point. The point is, you think you're some big, bad podcaster. But literally, I got about 4 comments from people saying that I suck, and the rest of them seemed like they were legitimately interested. Once you dropped your episode last night, I got about 50 friend requests on Facebook. So, Carl, this was all a part of a ploy to get free attention from your audience, and you fell for it. Like, I've been to war once I left Rover's show with Rover's Morning Glory, and Rover will talk about me, but he'll never respond to what I do. Even Kelda doesn't really respond to what I do. But you fell for my tactic. I was looking for free publicity, and you gave it to me. So the next time you feel really good about yourself, and you're like, oh my goodness, I'm so talented. Just remember that you got schooled by Ryan Hoppe, you little bitch.
Happy Hour. Happy Hour.